Wednesday, a bit of a gloomy one actually. I can see big rain clouds, so hurrying home a little bit. But Wednesdays are my favorite day because we're doing fun stuff in textiles, learning interesting things in design, and doing something that's kind of in my wheelhouse in CAD. So textiles is today's new embellishment skill is screen printing. So we're meant to bring in an image that was like 17 centimeters to try and do. I ended up bringing 3 because I wasn't sure what the limitations of the material we were going to be using were. So because I'm screen printing on one of my partner's old shirts, I'm doing the design for him, so it's one of his favorite anime characters. So carefully traced that. Well, first I did it up on the computer, tracing a picture from the manga, and then carefully using a light box to trace it onto the screen printing material, which is like a plasticky paper, so it won't absorb the ink from the screen printing process. And then you cut that out with like a scalpel or a knife or something. And because my design had floating pieces on it, I didn't think about that there would be parts that weren't connected to the outside edge. Then they're I have to line them up when I place it on the screen printing. The inks we use are apparently actually locally made, and they're safe to be put down the sink at school. So something a bit interesting and environmentally friendly about that. So because I used white, and all the other inks were have a translucency to them, so you could only use a color on a lighter color base. I had a dark base, so I had to use white. It was really thick and claggy. I could barely get it through the screen, so there are some patches on my design, unfortunately. I also ended up using the negative image that I cut out to test out another method, which is spray. So you spray over the image and then take the image away, and it's the outline of what you've got left. And one of the other ones which I didn't end up doing was mono printing, so painting on I don't know, a leaf or a stamp and pressing that down, or painting around it and seeing the impression that you get. But yeah, design class kind of cool.
Because then people will think I'm wearing a Metallica shirt.
No, it should sit in the car.
Okay. Because I don't want to waste it, that's why I didn't say it.
Alright, let's
Thursday today. It's a sewing day. We were meant to bring in our resource books, so every week when we do the sample, we put it in the resource books. I bring it every week, but it's massive and heavy. So we're supposed to bring it today so we can go through it all, make sure we have all the parts for it, check if there's anything that needs to be redone. Yeah, so last week finished the A-line skirt. Just did a little bit on it today, trimming off some threads and tying off loose ends and things like that. But I needed to check it to see if there's anything I've actually missed, in terms of overlocking or pressing seams or cutting something off or whatever else. Otherwise it seems okay. And today we're doing 2 more samples. We're doing waistbands. We're just adding them onto the lap zips that we've done a couple weeks ago. Here's my one, the lap zip. So we're adding this waistband, and learning a particular method for attaching this waistband. So in this case it was overlocking the bottom edge, and then attaching the right sides together, folding it back over, tucking in all these little extra bits that stick out the side, and doing what's called a stitch in the ditch. I've heard it be called something else. I've heard it be called seam shadowing. So you stitch right in the gap there. It's not a top stitch next to the seam. It's you pulling the fabric apart and you're stitching as close onto that line as possible. Obviously, if I was using a thread that actually matched the color of the fabric, you wouldn't really see it. I think that's the idea of it, but it then holds the back on there. And the reason this part is tucked in on both sides is so there's more clearance for the zip. Personally, I think it would have looked nicer if the whole thing was tucked under, but I guess that would just give it unnecessary bulk, so having the bottom overlocked is just an alternative to that. Obviously, you have to make sure that when you're stitching the inside, you want it to line up with this welt edge. and not go past that, otherwise you'll get a flap. And on this one, you want to like bag out this extension so you can add the button on it. Yeah, that's what we've done so far. We're going to do another one with another method after the break. So we'll see how that goes. Hello, coming at you from the end of the week. Nice and sweaty with a cute filter. I actually kind of like this one, the little panda clouds. Anyway, a way of attaching collars, like the nice professional way of doing like a stand turnover collar, like, you know, like a business shirt kind of collar, which I would love to show you right now, but I had to give my resource folder to the teacher at the end of the class, so I don't have it. But trust, I think I maybe took pictures. Yeah. Pattern making today was a fitted button-up blouse, so it looks like that. And we're patterning the whole thing using techniques that we've learned over the last couple of weeks. So the first technique we're going to use here is about moving the dart. So our block that we have has a dart across the shoulder to make it nice and fitted, because bodies aren't flat objects, obviously. So we're going to use two different techniques to move this dart to just under the arm, as in the illustration just previously. So one method, because I've decided where I want the new dart to be, this point, because that's where it kind of looks like on the illustration. Also, sorry for background noise, there's like machinery outside. So one method is to pattern this up on a piece of paper, cut out one side of the original block and this new line as well, and leave like a tiny bit of paper in the middle, and then you're gonna pivot it around to close this line over to this line, close it over there, and that opens up this new side seam, and then you can trace around that. This is a little bit wasteful of paper, so the other way to do it, so in red here you can see I've traced the original block, and then I've gone and I've marked those two lines again, and I've physically rotated the block and redrawn the line. So then you only have to cut it out once, and that's going to save a lot of paper. Important thing to note is that you don't actually want darts to go all the way to this point here. This on the block is the bust point, where your nips are meant to be at, and that would look weird having a line go all the way into your nips, unless you stylistically want that. So because this point for the under the bust dart is 3 centimeters away, we're going to do the same thing. So I have a 3 centimeter dart here, and then I just redraw the dart and wedge it off so that it, you know, tucks in nicely when you sew it up. So that's part one, is pivoting the dart on the block. And then part two down here. So my block doesn't have a hem. I need to add the hem in there. Easy done. And then the design actually has a yoke on it. So this part here, this flat part at the back that comes around the shoulder here. So that shows me that there isn't actually a seam on the shoulder. The seam is forward. So it's a shoulder forward yoke, I think they call that. There's probably a bunch of names for these things. But this is where I've marked it on the back. So it's going to be 10 centimeters down from the neckline seam. Mark it across, and don't forget we want to add, because we're splitting the pattern, we got to add the seam allowance to either side. Which means, because we don't have a shoulder seam, we no longer need this seam allowance here. So we're going to get rid of that. Then we got to go over to our front side. Draw in the 4 centimeters, because that kind of looks how far it goes down on the front on the illustration. Get rid of our seam there, add our new seam allowances here. But then when we go to make this as a pattern, we want this back piece and this front piece to be one part. So we'll make this whole thing, place it over the top of this, you know, getting rid of our seam allowance lines, and trace around the new section so it comes out in one piece. So that's just like a pattern making technique. So I made the notes on here for that. Here's our moved pivot line from the previous page, and because the design has this button front here, I've gone and added it here. So center line where the buttons are going to go, we did some maths to figure out the nice placement. using the last button rule that we've mentioned previously in one of the other videos. And because our buttons are 1.5 centimeters, we've got a 3 centimeter wide part. So this is going to be a top stitching line. We want it to be backed on. So here's the facing for the back. And because we don't want any raw edges, here's the backing for the backing, which is slightly thinner. So this is 3.3, so that it'll stick out a little bit past here. And then this is 3. So this 3 folds in under here, and this 3.3 folds in under here, and then it gets top stitch at this 3 mark. All right, the last step is the sleeve, the cuff, placket, and the collar. Now we've already patterned this collar before, previously, so because that previous collar was literally made on this block, we can just reuse it. So I pretty much could have just, you know, copied the previous pattern or not even had to make another one. But I went through the process anyway of doing out the maths and remaking the pattern rather than just, you know, using the one that I've already done before. With the sleeve, you'll see on the design that, you know, it's fitted as normal here, but it's voluminous at the bottom. You know, it's got a bit of gathering and a bit of puffs. We've got to add in mass at the bottom. So the red line here is the original block, and we're going to bring it out. And we're just going to, just for ease of use, we're just going to square it off from the armpit. But like this could be out even further and square back up to the armpit if we wanted even more gathering, you know, like something like a bishop sleeve. The wider it goes though, you're going to have to do a bit more maths to figure out the hemline. But yes, so this block does not have a hem or seam allowance on it. So it goes, this line goes right to the wrist. Obviously, the wrist has a cuff, so we want to bring it back a little bit. Our cuff is about 5 centimeters wide, so we're going to bring it back about 2.5. So then the excess 2.5 is going to kind of flounce over the top, which is kind of a more stylistic thing. Like if you wanted there to be gathering but not as much flounce, you would cut off the full 5 centimeters. So on our block, we mark back the 2.5 centimeters. Focus, bitch. Okay. So on our block pattern, this is the back of the sleeve. So the back of the sleeve, and this side is the front of the sleeve. This is a pro tip we learned. So if you're wearing a sleeve like this and you bend your elbow, it's going to pull on the back of your arm and gather on the front of your arm. So if we don't want lumpiness on the back and we don't want a tight feeling on the back of the arm, we actually do this. So we're going to extend and blouse out the back half of the sleeve and cut in the front half. Only a little bit, it's only 1.5, you know, and then you just kind of blend out these curves, which gives it just enough of extra give and ease so it, you know, it fits nicer and it feels nicer. So that's like a little professional tip the teacher taught us. And because we've got this placket here, like, you know, the opening and the cuff and how it goes up into the sleeve, we're going to mark that in the very center back. And by center, I mean between the seam allowance and the shoulder side, like this lines up to the shoulder, you know, between that gap there. And we're just guessing from the illustration, it's about a 10 centimeter one, and we're going to put a little tiny 0.6 seam allowance on it. So there's that. Yeah, so from there, we know that that's 10 centimeters, so we do a little bit of maths and we make our placket there, which is a bit more than 10. It's like 22 by 3.2, so it ends up being a 1 centimeter placket plus 0.6 seam allowance on either side. Okay, last bit is the cuff. A standard cuff, like wrist size, is like 22 to 25 centimeters, so we're just, you know, I got small wrists, so we're going to go on the 22 centimeter side. So we math out a 22 centimeter width plus 2 centimeters for the button overlap, then plus seam allowance around the whole thing. Calculating where the button goes, there was a trick we learned for that. So your button, ignore these extra lines, it's supposed to just be this X, is right in the middle of the button extension, obviously, that's where it marks off. But on the other side, for the buttonhole, you want to measure the button width, so 1.5 centimeters, plus another 1.5 centimeters. That's your width there, and then go back 3 millimeters for ease, because, you know, you need to be able to shimmy the button into the gap. Yeah. So after you've done up your plan and stuff, literally the last thing to do is do it all up in paper using the maths you already just did and the method you already just put down in your third scale plan. Do it up on all the pattern paper, mark out all of your little seam notches, anywhere that needs to be a fold, or like a notch that like lines up with another piece, grain lines to show the direction of fabric, numbering all the pattern pieces, naming all the pattern pieces, making like, we call them pink sheets because they're printed on pink paper, but it's like it's a pattern list sheet, so it tells you like all of the different pattern pieces. Hey Bobby. And what you're supposed to do with them.